Hello and welcome to the Bucket Lister podcast. Join your host Keith Crockford along with special guests who have travelled the world, here to share stories of their adventures and plenty of inspo to add to your bucket list. Now, let's get into today's episode.
Hello everyone and welcome to this episode of the Bucket Lister podcast. I am your host Keith Crockford and today I am back all on my own, but I'm going to be chatting to you about how fit do I need to be. And I've had 3 separate conversations with people this week and all around the same trip and all around Everest Base Camp. And people looking to do the trip in October or people looking to do the trip early in 2026. So a lot of them have been phoning up to inquire about booking onto the trip, but they want to know how fit they need to be. A couple of people have already done other trips like Kilimanjaro and things like that. But I just thought, what an interesting discussion to have today on the podcast to really highlight how fit you need to be to do a trip like Everest Base Camp. And I suppose this can go on to other trips as well. But I'm really going to be talking about Everest Base Camp today in terms of that and, you know, Gokyo Lakes and that style of trip. And what I was saying to these people was that actually you're kind of going about it the wrong way in thinking about it before you book it. Because I always say to people, like, if you go and have 3 months worth of training prior to a trip like Kilimanjaro, Everest Base Camp, then that is adequate time to get you into shape to go and do one of these treks. Now, obviously, I'm talking for the majority of the population. I'm not talking about people who might have never got off the sofa and they're 28 stone. They're probably going to need slightly more than 3 months to get ready for a trip like Everest Base Camp. But if you are already in average shape, shall we be, so you could go out for a walk, you could go out and, you know, go for a 5-mile walk, and you would be able to cope with that now, then within 3 months of training, you could be ready to go and do an Everest Base Camp trek. And so I suppose, and I've talked about this on the podcast before, the number of times I've turned up to the airport to meet a group and, you know, they've gone, I had all good intentions for this trip. I was going to train like hell for it and be in really good shape and be in the best shape I could get. And I booked this trip 12, 18 months ago. And before I knew it, I was packing ready to leave. And I just ran out of time. And those people have gone on and managed to go and do the trip that they had planned to do. And that's mainly, I think, because they wanted to do it. And that's the biggest thing with this is, and again, I'll repeat what I've said multiple times before, and that is when you're on one of these trips, it is 60% mental and 40% physical. You've really got to want to go and do it. And the other thing that I say to people as well is, you know, when you're on these trips, you know, we get people of all different fitness abilities when we start the trip, and the ones who generally struggle the most at the end are the ones who have been racing off and the ones who have been moaning about how the pace is so slow, and that's because they haven't given their bodies enough time to acclimatize for the trip. And those that have meandered on at the back and, you know, taken loads of photos and had a lovely walk and maybe got into the tea house an hour and a half after the first group, they've managed to get to the end fine because, you know, they've taken their time, they've enjoyed it, and they've allowed their body time to acclimatize, and they haven't pushed themselves every day. So that is the thing with high altitude trekking, is that it's not about being the first one to get there. It's about, taking your time, acclimatizing your body, and getting there in the best shape that you can. And whenever I'm leading these trips, generally I put myself towards the back of the group, because as a leader, if there's ever going to be a problem, the chances are it's near the back of the group, not at the front of the group, especially on the way up. And when I get into camp in the evenings or into the tea houses, I don't feel like I've pushed myself for the day. I've had a really enjoyable walk up. I can have a conversation with the people that I'm walking with. Yeah, and that's kind of the key thing, is if you can walk along and be able to hold a conversation, then you're probably going at the right pace. If you're struggling to chat and you're out of breath, you're probably going too quickly. So that's one thing that I highlighted to people this week, was when I was chatting to them, was, it's not about being super fit. It's about being conditioned and having the right mental attitude to go into the trip in the first place. And that's the biggest problem with an Everest Base Camp trek, for example, because it's a 12-day trek. You add Golkyo Lakes onto that, and it's a 15-day trip. So you've got to get up every day, put your boots back on, and walk again. Now, you might be able to go out and run a marathon, but then, that's one day. You've got to be able to do that, or to be able to get out and walk for 12 days or 15 days on the bounce. So that's the fitness that you need to get used to. People say to me, well, I don't live anywhere near the hills. And then you get other people who say, well, you've got to get out walking in the hills to train for a trip like this, which you don't have to at all, because ultimately, yes, walking is the best thing. But if you live in London, you're not going to be able to go up trekking in North Wales or in the Lake District all the time. It's just not going to be feasible for you. So there is nothing wrong with going to the gym. There is nothing wrong with going and walking on a treadmill at 3.5, 4 kilometers an hour, and putting it on, the highest incline that it's got, and just walking. Like, that is great training. Going on a Stairmaster, practicing, put your rucksack on. It is great training. You might look a little bit silly in the gym, but who cares? Obviously, if you can go out walking in the outdoors, then that's why we love going walking, because it is seeing the outdoors. Then that's great. But you don't need to be up in the mountains, because ultimately you're never going to be able to get that acclimatization in the UK that you do when you are, when you're going to be in Nepal. So, yes, you need to be walking up hills. Yes, you need to strengthen your legs, but but at the same time, the important thing is strengthening your back, strengthening your core, because, you are going to be carrying a rucksack with you. You've got your day pack on that you're going to carry with you throughout the trip. Now, so many people carry too much stuff in their day pack. They don't need to have all of that stuff with them. This is one reason, again, why I tell people now to take a water to go bottle with them, because you don't need to carry 3-4 liters of water with you at the start of the day. You can fill your 2 water bottles up and have 1.5 liters, and then when you stop, you can just fill them up from any tap, and you don't have to worry about buying bottled water or making sure that it's been boiled in the morning. You can just fill your bottle up. So you're already, in that instance, you're thinking about, if you had 3 or 4 liters, that's 3 to 4 kilograms of weight in your backpack. Whereas if you just take the water to go bottles, you can get away with, or you could even get away with carrying 0.75 of a kilo and keep topping your bottle up as you go. But I would always have 2 with me just in case. But, it just reduces that weight down that you then don't have to carry. So that's my top tip from this podcast, is the water to go bottles, or any filtered bottle. But obviously, we affiliate with Water to Go, and we love what they're doing. So we would always advise getting yourselves a Water to Go bottle. So in terms of fitness, the fitter you are, the more you are going to enjoy it. There's no doubt about that. And obviously that's different for everybody. Now, I'm not saying you need to be an ultra runner and be super fit, But the fitter you can get yourself, the more you are going to enjoy your trip. If you are not struggling to walk up the hills, if you're getting into camp or into the tea houses in the evenings, and you feel like you've had a lovely walk and you can get up in the morning and not be achy, that's what's going to really, really help you with your trip, and make sure that, you can get up the next day and do it again, because that's the biggest thing, is you don't have time to recover. You are going for it all the time. Like you're saying, you're getting up every day and walking the next day and walking the next day. So recovery is really important. And obviously, again, the fitter you are, the easier it is for you to then recover, ready for the next day, to get up, feel fresh again, and be able to go out and do another, hike of not a substantial difference. And that's the other thing that I say to people, like the distances on an Everest Base Camp trek, they're not that big from a day-to-day basis. You're talking anywhere from kind of 10K to 14K, 16K is what you're doing. And if I said to you, could you go and walk 12, 13K, you'd be able to get out there now, put a rucksack on and go out and walk the dog for 12 to 13K. But again, it's getting up and doing it again the next day and again the next day. And then also, obviously, having that altitude brought into it as well. And obviously having less oxygen to go with when you're on the trip. So the fitter you can get yourself before you go, the better it's going to be for you. And the more so that you're going to enjoy the trip itself. Like I said, I think I could take an average person who doesn't really do a great deal, but they're sort of in good physical shape. Maybe they're not training all the time. They're not a hill walker, but they would be able to go out and do an Everest Base Camp trek. They might not enjoy it. They might struggle a little bit. But if they really wanted to do it and they were mentally strong enough to do it, they could go and get to Everest Base Camp. It is, the path is it's a great path on the way up to Everest Base Camp. It's well trodden. Lots of people do it. Lots of people do it of different ages. There's youngsters doing it. I've seen families doing it with their children. There was a thing on social media a few months ago where, a family had taken I think they were like 5 and 7-year-olds, and did base camp. And obviously, there's people in their late 70s, early 80s doing base camp. So, age doesn't matter when it comes to a trip like this. But you really, really need to want to do it. And, as I've said again on other podcasts that I've done on base camp, the biggest struggle with base camp is the fact that it's an up and down route. So you spend 8 days walking up, you finish, because in your head you've finished, you've got to base camp, and then you need to turn around and then spend 4 days walking back down again. And that's the biggest thing with Everest Base Camp, and we've said this time and time again, is that on Everest Base Camp, it's not like a Kilimanjaro trek or a Mount Toubkal trek or a mountain trek where you are walking uphill for the first part of the trip and you get to your end point and then you turn around and you come back downhill again. That doesn't exist on an Everest Base Camp trek. As we've said, it's called Nepali Flat. There's always a little bit of up and there's always a little bit of down. It doesn't matter whether you're on your way up or you're on your way back. There are times when you're walking up a big hill and there are times when you are coming back down a big hill again. And from a fitness perspective, that's also, you need to train your body to walk downhill, because some people really struggle walking downhill. And if you've got bad knees, then downhills generally are far worse for you than uphills. So really strengthening your legs, strengthening your back, strengthening your core is super important. So to conclude this podcast, then, really, how fit do you need to be to do an Everest Base Camp trek? The answer is the fitter you can get yourself personally, the more you are going to enjoy it. As I said, I've seen so many people turn up and have done nothing, no training at all towards their trip, and they're just busy professional people, and they've made it there. Then I've seen people who have trained, and they're marathon runners, and then they've really struggled on an Everest Base Camp trek because of the altitude. So ultimately, I think anybody, like as I've said before, anybody can do an Everest Base Camp trip. If it's something you really want to do, then there is no reason why you can't do it. The better shape you are in, the better it is for you. And that's not just from I can go and run a marathon. That is, how strong is your core, how, strengthening your back up, practicing going downhill, putting weight on your back and then doing some steps down. There's a great blog post on our website that I will put to the show notes where one of our customers who's done Kilimanjaro with us and Mount Toubkal, he's a personal trainer, and he went and did a kind of what do you need to do to get in shape for an Everest Base Camp Kilimanjaro Mount Toubkal trek. So there's exercises in there, what to do to get yourself stronger, both from a strength perspective and from a cardio perspective, so you're good for trekking. And that, like I say, that doesn't mean that you need to be able to go out and run a marathon. That's just getting your body in shape. And then in that 3 months up to the run up of your trip, then getting yourself not just cardio strength wise, but making sure you're eating properly, making sure that you're really hydrated, are really, really important. So you're arriving there in the best shape possible, super relaxed to start your trek. And then obviously, mentally, you just need to be mentally prepared for it as well. It is tough, but your mind will always tell you to stop before your body does. You can keep going. Your mind will tell you you've had enough and it's time to turn around, but your body will still be able to give you more. If you really want to get to Everest Base Camp, and it's on your bucket list, then you so will be able to do it. So that's this quick podcast this week, looking at how fit you need to be for an Everest Base Camp trek. And the things that I've discussed also go with other treks as well, whether it's Kilimanjaro, Machu Picchu, Mount Toubkal. All these things still apply. Obviously, with Everest Base Camp, it's just a lot longer trek than the other ones are. So, it's much easier to do a 4-day Inca Trail trek than it is to do a 13-day Everest Base Camp trip. So, those are the things just to consider. But hopefully you found that useful. Hopefully, if you've got one of these trips on your bucket list and you're not sure whether or not you're fit enough and you can do it, hopefully that's cleared a few things up for you. And if you've got any questions, then please don't hesitate to give the team a shout. Because we're more than happy to help. And we do provide training plans and training ideas to those people who have booked with us as well. So when you've booked, you will get sent all that information as well. So that's it from me this week. I'll be back with another episode next week. But until then, thanks very much. Goodbye.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Bucket Lister podcast. Be sure to click follow to be alerted for next week's episode. For more travel inspiration, check us out at www.thebucketlistcompany.co.uk or follow us on socials. See you next time.